I am Daniel Lee Gibbs, and welcome to Law 101. Welcome to Law 101 that you guide you understanding the legal world, one case, one concept, and one conversation at a time. And today, I have a special guest. He's an experienced public speaker and, of course, conversationalist. No other than Mr. Noah Healy.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Daniel. My name is Noah Healy. I'm a recreational mathematician, professional algorithmist, and I've been working on a patent for the better part of a decade now on a new system for the operation of financial markets.
So, Mr. Noah, can you enlighten me? What is a patent and what types of intellectual property does you protect?
So a patent is a, a particular legal form that lets you have exclusive access to some form of technology for a limited period of time. I believe the term is 20 years. There are things that you can do to effectively extend that time by patenting sort of other advancements attached to an idea that then become commercially valuable and then spread it out that way. Uh, but it unlike a copyright, which is life plus time after you're dead, a patent ends in its own time, but it's more expansive than a copyright. Uh, a copyright can't encompass a story structure, but a patent on some new engine can encompass other minor modifications that don't change the conception of that engine or other kind of system. And as for what it covers, that is quite expansive in something that's uh, currently being legally debated. Uh, it is currently fairly unclear what is or isn't. There's something called the Alice test, which is a two-step test, except that the second step of the test actually has two prongs, and the second prong of the second step has two parts. So, the it gets very technical very quickly, and unfortunately, what my lawsuit has to do with is the technical inability of the people that are employed at the U.S. Patent Office to actually make determinations about technologies that involve computers, which is something that has been actively debated in the courts for, well, longer than I've personally been alive. So over 50 years at this point.
So, what are the different types of patent and how they do differ?
Uh, well, to some extent, there are not different types of patents, there are different departments of patents. So if you get a patent granted, it's sort of the same every way, whether you're getting a patent granted to like a new kind of building material or a new medical treatment or a new engine or a new hinge or whatever. But the people you're talking to and the expertise that you're dealing with changes depending on whether you're talking about things like electrical engineering or hydraulic engineering or medical devices or whatever. What I'm specifically working on is a system that is involved in the operation of financial markets, uh, which there's a case from 2019 that went to the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, which is somewhat colloquially known as patent court, where it was decided that the you could in fact patent systems that solved problems that arose in the operation of the marketplace from the use of computers. Uh, the patent in question specifically had to do with people calling in orders versus sending in computer orders, because humans answering telephones do things slower than computers receiving signals off of the internet. They patented using a clock to essentially time when the uh, signals came in, and shuffle them around so that instead of getting the time ordering on the back end after the signal had been processed, which would give people phoning in a systematic disadvantage, they would instead do it on the front end of when the signal came in order to vitiate that advantage. And so that is a process patent. Processes are patentable. This is important because things like manufacturing steel or cloth, uh, which does have machine assistance, is also a process which can be improved, and consequently we want protections that exist that encourage people to, number one, make those improvements because they can, receive the benefits of doing that, and then number two, share those improvements. That's the secondary purpose of the patent office, is to publish new information so that once that monopoly goes away, everybody has access to these better ways of doing things. And so uh, it is well established that tools and process improvements in financial markets are patentable. Uh, but the patent office is extremely reluctant to grant my patent, to the extent that they are presently violating their own regulations, and have been for 4 years now, not granting my patent.
So, Mr. Noah, who is or are you eligible to apply for a patent?
Yeah, well, patents are something that are enabled by the U.S. Constitution. Different countries have different patent law. There is this concept of international patents, but I have not pursued that. Effectively, the way an international patent works is simply going after a patent in multiple international jurisdictions. So you could apply for a patent in Canada and Mexico and England and the EU and dozens or every nation of Africa and Asia and Australia and so on. However, that costs a lot of money because they are all to some degree separate processes. There are places that have some common unification. The EU, for example, has sort of a one and done that will get its member states patents all in one piece. But in general, if you develop something that you want patented globally, I believe that is technically impossible, because I think there are countries that are not currently signatories to those systems, and so there are places where you just couldn't get the patent. But I might be wrong about that. But in any case, it would involve dealing with every independent government jurisdiction on earth, in order to get patents in each and every one of them. And their laws, uh, there's been extensive negotiation over the last century to unify the laws together, but there is still some variance across different locations. And one of the issues, again, going into this sort of technical field, is that the technical expertise doesn't necessarily exist among the the patent officers, the people that work in all these patent offices, to properly assess where modern technology is, because well, computer technology, for example, has been exponentially improving for something like 70 years now. And so at this point, there just aren't a lot of high level experts around. Certainly not enough to fully staff government departments in every government on the face of the earth.
So, what is the role of the patent office in granting patents?
Well, that's laid out in the Manual of Patent Examination Procedure, which is what the law authorizes them to produce and then follow. Uh, that manual has thousands of sections and it's all available online. It's huge in its total extent. Uh, and uh, their job is to examine proposals to determine whether or not they are patentable, which means that they would be novel. You're not allowed to patent ideas that are already in the public domain, um, and technically viable. You're not allowed to patent things that are economically or otherwise useless, and don't belong to some category of unpatentability. So, for example, after the Human Genome Project produced a map of human DNA, Congress passed a law making it specifically illegal to patent human beings. So, if it is determined that you are attempting to patent a person, then you're not allowed to do that. Uh,
So, how did you determine if your invention is patentable?
that effectively comes down to a conversation between you and your assigned examiner. And their job is to understand what it is that you're talking about and and come to a formulation that allows you to either get or not get a patent, either because they found prior art that wipes it out, or your explanation of how it works is completely unsatisfactory or completely satisfactory, or your claims are too broad or within scope. And if you can check the boxes, then that person issues what's called a notice of acceptance, and you can then take that notice of acceptance along with a fee to the patent office, and they will issue a patent. The sector, so in MPEP or MPEP, 1308 details what needs to happen once you've been issued a notice of acceptance. I was issued a notice of acceptance in 2020, and they proceeded to ignore it, which MPEP explicitly doesn't let them do.
So, what do you think why they ignore your case?
That's where it gets speculative for me because I don't have access to the people who are controlling these decisions. I think that there is certainly some incompetence that's involved here, and I can be assured of that because uh, ultimately, after explaining what was wrong with their reasoning the first time around, getting a second notice acceptance, and then having that one withdrawn, I then appealed to the patent board, and their reasoning was what little of it that they did was actually self-defeating. There's a precedent from 2019, the one I was talking about before with the phone call and the computer, uh, and they said that that precedent didn't apply to my patent because that patent uh, improved problems with the marketplace that resulted from computers, and my patent also resolves problems with the marketplace that result from use of computers. And so their attempted counter argument effectively proves my case. So they're unaware of the nature of modern technology, which is pretty common, but is also highly disturbing for people whose job it is to actually make modern technical decisions.
So, Mr. Noah, can you give us the criteria that the officer gave you that your invention is patentable?
Well, so the first thing is that it belongs to a category of things that are patentable. In general, market mechanisms are something that have been patented for centuries. Things like ticker tape machines are market mechanisms, and they were invented fairly shortly after the introduction of Morse code and the telegraph, which was also patented. And so there's centuries of people patenting market tools, market machines, and market mechanisms. The next thing to check is whether or not there's any prior art. The patent office came up with five different granted or abandoned patents that they thought might constitute prior art, and I was able to show in all five of those cases that they, in fact, had no relevance at all. This idea, as far as anybody knows, and I've been looking pretty hard along with a lot of other people at this point, this is a new idea under the sun. So that that's not relevant. And so then finally, the question is this actually better? And using a fairly basic analysis around system and computer system development, it's possible to show that this is hundreds of thousands of times more efficient than the market mechanisms that exist. And I actually submitted a mathematical proof to that effect in January of 2022. So that's the check boxes. If your system idea thing, whatever it is one of the patentable categories of stuff, which is incredibly broad. It's new, and it's better than the other things that are in that space in some way. Then, then at that point, it's patentable, and I can clear those three barriers.
So, how did you ensure your invention is unique?
Well, that's tough to do, but basically historical research. Um I did a lot of reading into the history, the development of markets, and then um, did a little bit of patent searching. Patent searching is something that's actually relatively difficult to do. The patent office is better at it than you are. And so after I did my due diligence, you know, we wrote up the patent, turned it into the patent office, and then they did their due diligence, and that's where they came up with these other potential overlaps. But none of the fits were particularly good, uh, and so I was able to show, and they were able to agree that in each case they were talking about something very, very different from what I was talking about.
Do you think that you miss a criteria for your invention because until now it is pending?
Uh, Not really. What looks like is happening to me is that the patent office, for reasons that I really have no access to, is just decided not to do their jobs. The MPEP 1308 that I referenced before is extremely explicit and says that if they have issued a notice of acceptance and the application fee has been paid, then they shall issue, which is, legally speaking, that's a very strong phrase, um, unless a director signs a letter of a notice of withdrawal. And they never did that back in 2020, 2021. That acceptance has no associated withdrawal and didn't generate a patent. And under the rules that allow that department to operate, they're not allowed to do that.
So, enlighten us. What is the importance of the claims section in a patent application?
Well, the claims are in fact what you're patenting. So if you imagine some kind of, sort of nefarious situation where you decide to patent a table, uh, and you could take pictures of a table that already exists for the description, and then in your claims, you could patent. You could claim something that's entirely unrelated. You could start describing like a pencil or something. If that patent were granted, the fact that you had pictures of tables and descriptions of tables and an abstract talking about a table would, legally speaking, be irrelevant to the claims that actually described a pencil. Now, as a practical matter, the description part of a patent exists in support of the claims, and that kind of, schizophrenic application would never be granted in the first place. Uh, but the claims are ultimately what is being assessed for patentability. And the other parts of the patent are effectively supporting material or contextual material that can allow for the understanding of what it is that's being claimed.
So let's say your patent is granted in the US, how you will protect your invention in multiple countries.
I actually have no particular intention to pursue patents in other countries. I have two different strategies to try to get this invention into general use. And in other countries, my strategy is to use open source approaches. So there is code that implements one of these systems, and it is open sourced under the Creative Commons. I think it's the 4.0 license. So should the patent be granted, that would supersede that licensure within this country. Uh, the the difference between patent and copyright protections are such that the patent is more inclusive, and so um, I'm creating a kind of IP that I can sell inside the United States in case there's somebody that's interested in buying the IP, and the kind of IP that I can share outside the United States in case there's somebody that's interested in sharing the IP. And I'm just kind of seeing which of those two things happens uh, more effectively.
So let's say your invention is granted. What is the process for maintaining a patent?
Well, to some extent, you don't really maintain patents. So you do have to keep an eye open uh, for infringement. It's not like the FBI is going to investigate people that might be infringing your patent and bringing them to your awareness. Uh, but um, your patent becomes enforceable at that legal level. So you can sue people, and if the patent sort of holds up to legal scrutiny, then a judge will basically tell them, you have to stop doing what you're doing because you're not legally allowed to have this thing or do things in this fashion, or whatever it is that they're doing to violate your patent.
So, what are the ethical considerations when filing for a patent on a collaborative invention?
Well, that doesn't really apply to me, but that's a interesting point because you're creating a property right. So the property right does not exist without the patent. If you have a collaboration and you create a piece of property, somebody's name will be on it, and so to some extent, you need to work out how those names will be distributed uh, before you apply for the patent. And this can also cause difficulties because there might be different levels of contribution to the invention that then change over the course of the actual patentability. Typically, there's a certain degree of negotiation that occurs with that patent examiner to determine what is and what is not patentable and how to express what is and is not patentable. Again, in my case, since I'm doing this, by myself with some legal advice from time to time, I am making these decisions, and I'm the person doing sort of the heavy lifting in terms of conceptualization and building and so on. But it's fairly easy to imagine an invention that looks like it's 50-50 or even 90-10 one way, that in the course of patentability determines that the part that actually is patentable is on one side rather than the other, and the ethical division might be very different than what was originally conceived.
So, Mr. Noah, to sum up our discussion, what you gonna do for your next step for your invention?
Well, I'm suing the patent office in appellate court for the federal circuit. I've filed my motion or brief. I did so in early November this year, and my case effectively boils down to the fact that they don't actually have a case. They violated the law in order to actually get things to this point in 2020. They've advanced three separate arguments, all of which contradict one another, and none of which actually stand up to themselves. They've advanced no evidence in favor of any of their arguments. I have produced logically airtight counter arguments with evidence for every single thing that they've said. And so now I have to kind of see what a judge says. The patent office has an attorney assigned to the case. Actually, the emails that I received from him have 7 different names on them, and most of them are attorneys. So there's a team on the other side. They just filed for an extension, and so they have until July 10th to file their counter brief. And at that point, I have around 2 weeks to file a response. And after that, it goes to judges in a court in Washington, and I guess I see what they say.
Good luck for that, Mr. Noah. And one more, what will be your advice for those creator out there that they want to patent their invention?
Well, number one, don't tell anybody about it until after the patent's filed. I've talked to a lot of patent attorneys. That's right up the top of the list. I do have to say that the patent attorneys that I was working with, uh, that in their opinion, the patent system is currently destabilized enough that receiving a patent is effectively a random occurrence. There is a case called American Axle versus Neepco Holdings, which is also from, I believe, around 2019, where a a patent was found to be invalid. A patent that was being violated was found to be invalid, and so the company attempted to appeal that invalidation to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, but didn't schedule it. And after like a year and a half of briefs coming in from former heads of the patent office, senators, and so on, begging the courts to clarify what was and was not patentable, the courts decided that they actually didn't want to hear the case. The court decided actually didn't want to hear the case after all. So this is sort of an active area. The legislature does not want to pass a new law. They're pretty sure that they'll all lose their seats if they try to do anything like that. The courts don't want to get involved because they've made a lot of very embarrassing decisions over the last 50 years, and they'd like to make as few of those as possible. And the executive, they've got the MPEP, but they're fairly desperate. They're not entirely certain how they're supposed to apply these ideas, and it is difficult. Abstractions are a core and fundamental to the patent system, but the Supreme Court has explicitly said that you're not allowed to patent abstract ideas, but they've uninclined to define what is and is not an abstract idea. Again, the technology level of modern technology has been improving, rapidly, exponentially for more than a human lifetime at this point. So the expertise to appropriately evaluate things doesn't necessarily exist. That's one of the points I'm also making, is that there are mathematical and physical proofs that allow us to, in fact, measure these things in entropic and energetic terms, which I'm on the right side of, because I've been very consciously attempting to constrict this in ways that some of the other patents that have been granted that they tried to bring up as prior art clearly were not attempting such self-restriction for. Uh, but at the end of the day, I got to see what people say about it, and so I've made my case, and I await their case to see how I can respond to it.
Mr. Noah Healy, thank you so much for your inventions, and I wish you all the best. So, Mr. Noah, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bodycom people, see you soon. So this episode will